Welcome to Building Fortunes Radio. Make sure you check us out at buildingfortunesradio.com. Along with our marketing partners, we're here to help our PM Marketing Network Lead customers build their businesses and make the world a better place. At Building Fortunes, we know how much your business means to you and the people important to you. So spread the word, tell a friend, join our newsletter, and go make a difference in your world. Now on to our show with your host, Peter Mingles.
Hello, everyone. Peter Mingles here. You're listening to us live on Building Fortunes Radio. That's www.buildingfortunesradio.com. For those people unfamiliar with my voice, of course, my name is Peter Mingles. Just a friendly reminder, you can listen to us live on any kind of an internet listening device if you go to buildingfortunesradio.com/live. So at the appropriate time when we're doing a radio show like this one on a Saturday at 8:30 p.m., if you go to buildingfortunesradio.com/live, you'll be able to listen in. On Saturday evenings at 8:30 p.m., I get a chance to share a microphone in this platform with a gentleman, Scott Johnson. And Scott and I met, it's going to be almost 3 years ago in August, as a result of a conversation that I had on the radio show where we were talking about some of the predatory practices associated with the home-based business industry that a lot of people don't pay attention to. And it had to do with the tools scam. And Scott and I had a really great conversation, and that led to me asking him to be a special guest for us on Building Fortunes Radio. And I said to him, Scott, I don't know how many radio shows we'll be able to talk about the tools scam, because, you know, after a while that'll get old. But as we started speaking and doing our radio show, we found that there were lots of other things that he was very knowledgeable about. So we decided that we would do a regular segment, and we have some fun times on this radio show where we show people the potholes and the pitfalls of some of the stuff associated with the MLM world. And some of it's lighthearted, and some of it gets kind of serious sometimes relative to finances. But today, Scott has brought on a very special guest, and this is my first time speaking with him as well, although I watched his videos that he put up on YouTube. And I think this is going to be a really very interesting radio show about some of the darkest sides associated with the MLM world and organizations like this. So I want to, first of all, thank Scott for bringing on first, a couple of weeks ago, Frank Parlato, who was really reporting this story on NXIVM, and now our special guest, and I'll let Scott introduce him because he did all the legwork for him. But Scott, thanks for being here, and thanks for all the things that you do to give us some additional material about some of the things that happen in this world. So back to you.
Peter, thanks for having me again. We do have a real interesting individual with us today. His name is Ben Szemkus, and I'm going to introduce him in just a minute. But I want to let people know, especially if they're first-time listeners, I was in Amway for several years, and then I found out about the tool scam. That was back in 2005, actually. And ever since that, I've been trying to educate people about Amway and how it really is a scam, and they really need to go in with their eyes wide open. And I've also discovered some other things, such as most MLMs don't have very much retail sales, which makes them illegal pyramids, and that includes Amway, by the way. And not all MLMs have tool scams, but the ones that do, you need to be aware of it. You need to be aware of the prices that your upline charges for various meetings and books and audio and video recordings and voicemail and website access and et cetera, so that you can determine whether or not they're making their boatload of money from the tools, which is what happens in Amway, versus the Amway business, which is what they're promoting. So it's really important to understand those basic things and go in knowledgeable and asking the right questions and looking for the right things. And to your point, we do go after some of these extreme stories like NXIVM because sometimes it's good to illustrate something with an extreme example, and NXIVM is definitely an extreme example. And for those that are interested in it, it's spelled NXIVM, and the best website I found to find out all about NXIVM is called frankreport.com. Frank Parlato, that we had on a couple weeks ago, has done just a yeoman's job, a tremendous job of documenting all kinds of stories. He's got outstanding sources, and I don't know where he gets all this information, but he's obviously has tons of high-quality sources. and is really into this story, trying to expose this MLM scam. Basically, it's a sex cult, allegedly. I have to throw that in there. But the founder is currently in jail, awaiting his October 1st trial, which will probably be delayed, along with a woman by the name of Allison Mack, who some people might recognize as being in the, I guess it was a Teenage Superman show a few years ago. And Ben helped me out with the name. Smallville, I think, is the name of it. And so she's, kind of like a B or C level movie star, so to speak, celebrity. And then there's other people involved in it too. But if you want to learn more, go to frankreport.com, and there's all kinds of other stuff out there on the internet too. If you just Google NXIVM and let your eyes and fingers do the wandering. But yeah, we use these extreme examples to illustrate something that might look a little more subtle, something that you may not pick up on in a traditional MLM. And so these kinds of things are very good to teach people what to look for. If you teach the extreme, then they might see the subtle a little bit easier. So Ben Szemkus, I think I got that name right, Ben.
Yes.
I'm trying to remember where I found you. I don't recall exactly where I came across you the first time, but I noticed you about a week ago, and you were talking. I believe it was probably on Twitter. I think I was just doing my normal NXIVM searching on Twitter, looking for interesting stories, and I came across yours. And I want you to introduce yourself and basically tell us about your experience with NXIVM several years ago. I think you actually had two experiences, one in 2007 and another one in 2014. And we're just really interested to hear about this because it's got some big names involved in it, particularly your story and your experience in 2007. So I'll just let you rip into it and let you do some talking, and then if you don't mind, me or Peter might break in every once in a while. We'll try not to interrupt you too much, just to clarify something or expand on something, but go right ahead.
All right. First of all, thanks for having me. I appreciate the attention. I really in trying to tell about this experience I've received. Some amount of pushback from people, but as you mentioned, I did make a video, and I started with there was a statement that I had written down pretty early on, but it was more, just kind of a memory exercise first of all, and then it had expanded as I started remembering things, as the blocks of memory started to kind of come together. And essentially, it started out because there is all this NXIVM stuff that you see in the news magazines and whatnot, and I'm looking at these pictures, as I stated before. I'm seeing these pictures of Allison Mack. I see these pictures of Keith Rainier, and even these pictures of Stormy Daniels. I'm saying, not just that I'm, familiar with these people or I've seen them before in some other news or something like that, but I was looking at them like, I know these people. I know these people from somewhere. Person to person, face to face. I've seen these people before. And it was driving me kind of crazy a little bit. And looking into things, I had a coworker who had a little bit of an obsession with Smallville, and that had Allison Mack in it. And I thought, well, I'm going to kind of just look into this stuff. I'm going to watch this show and just see, just see what's going on. See if there's anything there that might be a little bit weird, or see if there's anything that would be a linkage with the NXIVM group in general, or just the aspects of the cult in general. And I think I got about 1.5 episodes in, and I said to myself, I've seen all this before. This is something that I've seen. I don't know why I would be watching some goofy Teen Steam WB show, and I started to think about it, and that that's when I started really uncovering, and it was like the only way I could describe it is say, you hear a song from the past, and it reminds you of something, and then all of a sudden you start thinking about what that song had reminded you of, and then it's all these different kind of details come back to me. It's typically how memory works, I imagine, but that's how this one went, and it wasn't until about May 15th that I really came together and remembered a lot of this stuff and put it all down on paper. Actually, I put it down on GitHub, and as I started talking more and more about it, I started remembering more and more people. I started looking at pictures of a lot of these different people who were supposedly involved with NXIVM, and realizing that I was at a party and I was surrounded by these people. And this was back in February of 2007. This is when I was going to Southern Connecticut State University, which is in New Haven, Connecticut. And I ended up going to this party through a friend of a girlfriend. This friend of a girlfriend was approached while she was studying in a Yale library. She did not go to Yale, but she was a Southern student, but she was in the Yale library, which isn't anything odd or anything like that, because that is a public library. And she was approached by 3 blondes, just three white girls that were blonde, and she was invited to this. How they posed it to her was that it was a women's empowerment movement recruitment party, and it was a mixer. And she thought it was interesting, so she invited my girlfriend at the time. My girlfriend at the time wasn't too excited about it, so she invited me. Apparently it was supposed to be just a female-only thing, but they brought me along, and the reason that I got to stay was that we told them that I was the ride there, which was not true, because I didn't have a car at the time, so. But we used that as a story for me to stay, and that is where during that party, just kind of the warm-up of that party was they had put on Smallville, kind of waiting for the first guests to arrive, and that's where I first saw that, and so I completely remember that. And then as I said, the guests arrived, and the guests that they were awaiting was Allison Mack, and she ended up arriving there with Keith Rainier. And I think overall, there was a couple of girls in there that were kind of disappointed that the more popular of the stars of that show, it was Kristen Crook, was not showing up. And actually, the host said that she's not involved with NXIVM, so she won't be showing up. And Mac had showed up with Rainier, and they hung out for a little bit. I mean, I think there was probably a good 20 minutes before any of the other guests started showing up. And I got to talk with Rainier. I got to talk with Allison Mack for just a second. I didn't talk with her much. And then I talked with for a little bit with, I didn't get his name, but he was just this kind of bald man with, he had a clipboard. And he just kind of had a demeanor about him that he was just kind of studying things. So he did have a very scientific demeanor about him, because he seemed all business. He wasn't down for partying or anything like that.
Benjamin, can I ask you, hold on for one second. I just want to give our listening audience a little bit of further backdrop of why this story is so important relative to MLM. For those people who are unfamiliar with NXIVM, Keith Rainier right now is in jail. As far as what he did, but a lot of people don't know that Keith Rainier kind of got his roots from Amway. He went through the Amway thing, and then he decided that he wanted to build his own network marketing company called Consumers Byline. And he had been in a lot of trouble relative to Consumers Byline, and was written up and whatever, was even, I think, stopped by the FTC, a whole bunch of things like that. But that's where he kind of got his roots on the MLM stuff and kind of learned the trade of edification and learned the trade of being like that celebrity and the allure, and then started a program called ESP, which was Executive Success Program. And this is where he started to get some very smart, very educated, very wealthy, if you will, or wannabe type people like that. So higher echelon type people, polished, professional, and this is where he kind of stepped up his game a little bit and used that as the mousetrap for what eventually turned into a sex slave cult kind of a thing that eventually is the reason why he's in jail. So the reason why we're talking about this story right now is because of that evolution of some of the traits, and Scott, you can jump in, the edification, the mystery, the self-development, if you will, the surrounding yourself with other really smart people, and then eventually picking off, if you will, some of the vulnerable ones for these things. And he did it really, really well with some celebrities, some people that were wealthy, the heirs, if you will, of the Seagrams family, I think. And right now we're watching this whole thing kind of fall apart, and maybe even more people go to jail. Keith Raniere is in jail right now, probably never going to see the light of day. Allison Mack may or may not flip. The people, the Seagrams heirs, they might themselves be indicted. Who knows? These are all allegations, perhaps. But these are things that are being written up on Frank Report. And as this web gets a little bit deeper, you're going to start to see how it spiders out even beyond the typical MLM world into some of the political features that Benjamin is going to bring up right over here. So the reason why I wanted to put this in place is the window dressing behind what got everybody into these things is their ESP-type program, where it was self-development, enlightenment, the whole concept of, get out of your pain, we're going to help you with your fulfillment, and all of those types of things, and then twisted and perversed by this gentleman named Keith Raniere. And as you hear the different stories and read the different stories on Frank Report, you'll see that maybe, just maybe, when Benjamin is telling his story, this was the beginning portions of it before it got really extreme. But just think of how much this developed and festered into some of the people that you're going to hear about as Benjamin tells you the story, and wonder how deep it really goes. So, Benjamin, I just wanted to give our Building Fortunes radio listening audience a little bit more backdrop, so this way, as you're telling this story, they see what happens with these things over time as well. Scott, if you want to jump in and correct or comment or whatever, because I want to give our Building Fortunes radio listening audience the best backdrop to really appreciate what he's mentioning as we go forward. So back to you, Scott.
Yeah, Peter, I think you brought out all the high points perfectly as far as how it relates to MLM. And to your point about the Bronfman sisters, I believe it's Claire Bronfman, who's now NXIVM's main supporter. And the court hearing last week, I think it was last week in New York, the judge was reviewing a proposal from Raniere for a $10 million bail, which happens to be, I think coincidentally, the same amount as Harvey Weinstein got, to let him out of jail until the trial. And Keith Raniere was essentially saying, I want the same thing. I'll even, stay in a house with guards, armed guards, and, you can keep track of me and all that kind of stuff. And the judge turned him down. But part of that discussion was they didn't know where the $10 million was coming from. The Raniere lawyers would not disclose that. They refused to say where the money was coming from because Keith claimed to be just dirt poor. He says, I don't make any money. I don't have any money. I own half of a $60,000 house. I have nothing, essentially. And they were kind of dancing around Claire Bronfman's name. They kept talking about a wealthy heiress is probably the one that's backing this up. And everyone in the courtroom, I'm sure, knew it was Claire Bronfman, but they wouldn't say the name. And the rumor now, it's more than a rumor really, because the Department of Justice said we're going to make some additional arrests in the pretty near future, maybe 3 or 4 weeks it might take, but it's coming. There's going to be more charges against Raniere and Mack, and there's going to be some additional people drawn in, and some of them are the money that's behind all of this NXIVM thing. And to be clear, NXIVM is funded by the Bronfmans, not just the court and the lawyers, but going back years and years. I think 2002 is the time frame that they got involved with NXIVM from a financial and support standpoint. So all good stuff, and I'll hand it back to Ben. Go right ahead, Ben.
All right. I guess going forward with what I was talking about with the series of events.
Right, so we interrupted you when you talked about the guy with the clipboard.
Yeah, this guy, he seemed like a pretty serious guy. He definitely wasn't there for any kind of partying or anything like that. I spoke with each of them a little bit. I remember the conversation that I had with Keith. We mainly talked about because he had mentioned that this movement that he was starting. They were using words like movement and things like that, or organization. But he mentioned that the movement that they were starting, he brought up that he was going to take these females and use them to teach children multiple sets of languages throughout the course of, through some sort of duration or something like that. And we kind of broke off into a conversation about teleology, which is essentially it's basically broken down into the study of communication, whether you to deliver a signal, and then there's a receiver of the signal, and then there's either noise in between or there's a lack of noise in between, and it's basically the dynamics of, say, a conversation, or say someone signaling a message to someone else. It's kind of like that. I feel like I'm getting that right, but I could be wrong. But we had a conversation about this, and it seemed as though, he seemed like kind of a needy person to be talking to. He just seemed like someone who really only responded to positive reinforcement, really, and anything else was just, I don't know. He seemed like a very aloof person, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. In his mannerisms, and he kind of just walked around the room. He was kind of floaty a little bit, like he just kind of had this an air about him that he seemed like kind of the boss of the show. He just seemed like he was in charge of things, and he just seemed like he owned the room pretty much. So I spoke with him for a minute, and for the most part, I was kind of ducking out the back because there was a deck that was attached to the dining room. And
Ben, would you say he was treated with deference from everyone else? Everyone kind of looked up to him, respected him, and treated him really nice and that kind of thing?
No one really approached him. No one really went up to talk to him at all or anything like that. He just kind of walked around the room looking at, pictures on the wall or the artwork that was, say, on like a corner desk or something like that. He was just kind of observing the scene, and I didn't really see too many people conversing with him at all, as a matter of fact.
Okay.
And were these people already in the deal, quote unquote, or were they prospects for the deal? Most of the people in the room, do you think they were already part of the, let's call it the association or this movement, or were they being pitched on this movement?
I think they were more being pitched on the movement because as far as I was told, because I even said at one point, I was like, hey, when does this party get started? And they said, no, this is not a NXIVM party. This is a recruitment mixer, is what they're calling it specifically. And the host went on to say that it was, NXIVM party is these huge, grandiose events, and there's all kinds of balloons and just a lot of sexually intonations, a lot of scantily clad women, and it's a huge extravaganza. So they did make a big differentiation between that being a party and that being a just kind of a recruitment mixer. And
Got it.
But like I said, I kept ducking out to the back, and I was smoking cigarettes and things like that. So a lot of the people that started entering the party, I really didn't see them come in. But there was Allison Mack and Rainier. I think I was on the back deck when Stormy Daniels had arrived, and she came in with her bodyguard. Cool, pretty good. He was a pretty nice dude. I got to talk with him for a second, although I don't remember his name. I want to say it's a Kurt or something like that, but that's probably wrong. Don't quote me on that one. But I'm hanging out on the back deck, and then that's when Stormy Daniels pops out, and she's on the deck, and she had just arrived. She's there with her bodyguard, and she asked if she can bum some cigarettes off me, and I bummed her some cigarettes, and we smoked a couple of cigarettes together. And it basically just chit-chatted, some light chit-chat. For the most part, I was just telling her jokes because typically if I'm at a party and I really don't know what else to say to someone, I'll just tell them a bunch of jokes. I was warned not to call her a porn star. She was officially they were touting her as the special guest. They kept saying, as a special guest. Stormy Daniels. At the time, me and my girlfriend at the time, we were looking at each other, just like, who the hell is Stormy Daniels? Who is this? And someone had said, she's an adult film star, and I said, no, you mean like a porn star? And they're like, do not call her that when she's there. She's an adult film star. They made it specific that that's the nomenclature that she wanted to go with. And we talked for a second. She's a really nice person. She was bubbly. She was amiable. You usually think adult film star or porn star. You think someone kind of bitchy, just like a bitchy kind of princess person, but she wasn't like that at all. She's pretty down to earth, I would say.
So she was there as the celebrity, one of the celebrities, just like a speaker, or do you think she was involved in the movement?
See, that's what I don't know.
You don't know.
I'm not really sure. Because I don't know if she was there to join up with the group. I don't know if she was there for some sort of initiation. It wasn't really clear to me. I know that she did have an air of nervousness around her, and she kind of looked around at the inside, from the deck. She kind of looked around, and there's all these, probably about a baker's dozen worth of girls in the room. That was inside the living room, and she had said that she was pretty nervous. Which I can understand because when you're dealing in especially I guess if you're in the world of porn, you're not typically surrounded by a bunch of females and females especially that think they're part of a female empowerment movement. The porn industry is a rather nefarious business, and you're definitely just surrounded by a lot of very sketchy dudes. But she did. She said she was pretty nervous, and looking at the inside, it did look like there was just a sorority, kind of a gaggle of girls that were acting very much so like they were in a sorority. And I could see why she'd be nervous about that, but otherwise it just seems kind of strange that she was nervous. So something. And as a guy, you were not supposed to be there. This was definitely a woman's only kind of a thing. You were somehow or another. You were there, but you really weren't supposed to be there. Yeah. they made that clear for a second, and then after a while they kind of dropped it. I was kind of accepted as one of the party people, I guess. And that's at that point, I think it was through like maybe the 1.5 cigarettes that Allison Mack had poked her head out the door, and she looked at Stormy and she said that we're starting. And so Stormy put her cigarette out and then went inside. And Mac, she looked at me and the bouncer who were standing out on the deck, and she said, "This is the girls' only part of the party." And then at that point, maybe about a minute later, maybe 2 minutes later, the other male that was there, I think he was one of the boyfriends of one of the girls who lived in the apartment, because I think it was 3 girls who lived there. There was 2 girls that lived in one room, and there was another room that the host had lived in. That was her room. So there was a 2-bedroom apartment, and then it had 1 bathroom. And so, I mean, it wasn't a small, tiny apartment. It was actually pretty roomy, but it was still just a 2-bedroom apartment.
And Ben, just to clarify, most of the prospects that were there, they looked like they were Yale students. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm assuming that most of them were Yale students. There could have been some girls there that were from UNH, from the University of New Haven. And as far as I could tell, me and the 2 females that I came with, they were the only ones that I could tell that were just from Southern Connecticut State University. But I'm basically assuming that for the most part it was Yale students that were there in attendance.
If you know how this NXIVM operates, they're looking for people with the means to buy all these training programs. So it's pretty natural that if you approach a bunch of Yale female college students, a lot of them are going to have the money to pay for these programs. I just wanted to kind of lay that out there. And this location you're at is, what, a couple miles from Yale University, would you say?
I would say, because it is in Hamden, I'd say it was in the greater New Haven area, but it was in Hamden. It's right off of Route 10. And it's right behind where the Hamden Plaza is. I don't know if there's still a Hamden Plaza there or not, but it was at the time that there was a Hamden Plaza. And if you go up, there's a little hill that goes up kind of right perpendicular to it. It's called Skiff Street. And it was right up there, up the hill, and just pretty much right behind where, there was a Walmart there or something like that. I think it used to be like a Bradley's or something like that. But there was a Walmart, and that's where the apartment was. I don't remember the exact apartment or what the apartment's names were or anything like that, but I know it was right back there.
So then, so far, what you
it wasn't very far off campus, though, right?
Right, and then so far,
it wasn't.
Yeah,
no.
This whole thing started more or less as a friend of yours or someone that you knew was in a library. They get introduced or invited to come to this event. You're sitting there at this event. There's a couple of celebrities, if you will, and then some other people started walking in as well. So I think who else did you meet when you were there? What other contacts?
So there was the girls part of the party, which was, Allison Mack basically led that whole part of it where she was talking to the girls. I have no idea what she was talking about, but the girls were just kind of sitting there, attentive. Most of them were pretty much just sitting, almost not Indian style, but just kind of propped up on their knees, and just all kind of in a semicircle in the living room. And Mac had a little bit of a speech going on. She's kind of the ringleader when it came to all this part of it. And then Keith Rainier, he talked for a while. I imagine he was talking about the movement or whatever they were doing, whatever the group was and what it was all about. And then Stormy, she had a brief section where she talked, and she probably just talked about, I imagine probably how she met up with them or what exactly her role in all of that was. all of this stuff I really, I didn't hear. I was kind of peering through the slotted blinds of the sliding glass door, and just smoking cigarettes, hanging out with the other boyfriend that was there, and the Stormy's bodyguard. And eventually the group broke up, and they went, because there was a computer that was in the living room. I imagine it was like the communal apartment computer that they had, and then a bunch of them went to the back rooms because there was computers back there as well. And each of them kind of spent time on the computers. It's probably about a minute, maybe 2 minutes each on the computers. Because when we were coming back in, they said, okay, it's okay for you to come back in now. There was a female that was still on one of the computers, and she was finishing up something. I didn't even look at what it was. But I did notice that the bald guy was watching her, and he had a clipboard. And later on, when I talked with my ex-girlfriend, or my girlfriend at the time, and her friend, they said that it was just a whole bunch of videos of snuff they were watching. People getting beaten up or killed, or just basic snuff films. And my girlfriend at the time said that she thought most of those were fake, and then the girl that we were with, she said that they were just disturbing. It was just weird. But I didn't get to see them myself, so I don't really know. They just described them to me, and that's as far as I know.
So these weren't. I'm unfamiliar with your term snuff, so I don't know what that means. So, and I'm sure most of our listening audience might have a question about that as well. So you're not just talking about some porn thing or something. Just you're talking about something so a little bit more extreme, maybe even a little bit more violent or perverse.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't porn. Yeah.
So this is not something you'd probably be showing somebody who's coming in to join the self-development movement.
Yeah, that seemed a little bit off the mark. But then again, I've said this before. When it comes to Yale parties or New Haven parties, I really don't know what you don't know what to expect.
Right. Okay. That's right.
Because
it's a college thing, so you never know.
It's not just that. You're dealing with an Ivy. This is an Ivy League college, and most of the attendees there, they have wealthy parents. You don't get into Yale without having a little bit of dough, unless you're on some sort of a scholarship or something like that. Right. So Yale would be a good target for a cult because of that. You have a lot of people who they have parents that have some sort of power or influence. Lots of judges' kids, lots of CEO kids, people like I said that just have money in general.
Right. So you go from as an outsider looking in, I'm thinking, okay, so this went from a little bit awkward to okay, now this is getting weird. So then what happened?
Yeah. So we came back in because the female part of the female only part of the party had just wrapped up, and they had done all their video stuff, and the host started turning the lights down low, just turning off some of the extra lights that were in there, just trying to set kind of an atmosphere. She put on some music. I don't remember what the music was. It was probably some goofy shit or whatever. But I noticed that's when other guests had started to arrive. And one of them, I noticed this guy come through the door, and he kind of like salt and pepper hair, dark rings around his eyes. And he comes in, he looks around at the room, he sees all these girls walking around, just kind of drinking cocktails and things like that. And he sees me, like we lock eyes from across the room, and he walks right over to me, and we start talking, and he introduced himself, and said his name was Eric Schneiderman. and he said that he was a state senator. And I don't know. I didn't know anything about politics. Actually, I had a roommate who was a poli-sci major, and I wanted nothing to do with any of that. I was an economics major, so those things really didn't really match up or cross over together, especially in the kind of studies that we were doing. So I'm not, I wasn't really into politics whatsoever. But he said, I'm a state senator from New York, and I said, oh, you're a senator. And he said, no, I'm a state senator. That's a different thing. Said, oh, okay. And he mentioned something about the movement. And he said, did you talk to Keith Rainier yet? Did you talk to Keith about the movement? I said, yeah, I talked with him for a second. And he said, oh, this is such a great thing that they're doing, and, this and that. And I said, it seems like you guys are just starting some sort of weird army. And he's like, yeah, we are in a way. And we talked a little bit more, and probably not for more than about 3 or 4 minutes, and then I was going to go back out to have another cigarette, and I actually mentioned to him, I was like, hey, I'm going back out for a cigarette. Do you want to smoke any weed or anything like that? And he said, no, I can't do that. No, thanks very much, no. He said, I don't think my constituents would be happy with that. And so, I went back out and smoked another cigarette, and coming back in, I noticed that there was some more guests that arrived. And one of them was this gap-toothed guy with sort of a froey hair style, and he had a tight white shirt on, and a beaded necklace. And that was what I later was able to recognize through looking at pictures. That was James Alefantis. And I spoke with him for a little bit, maybe about 3 or 4 minutes. And he had mentioned that he had a pizza place in D.C. And we talked about pizza for a second because I've worked for a couple of different restaurants where we did pizza, and so that was kind of an area that I could bullshit about. And I basically, one of my big things with pizza is the difference between pizza from the East Coast to the West Coast. Because East Coast pizza has definitely a certain taste to it that it's very hard to mimic and almost impossible to mimic on the West Coast, which I would attribute to probably the mineralization of the water, or maybe just the pH of the water in general when you're rising the dough. And one of the tips that he had mentioned that when you're making the dough is that instead of water, you use soda water. So that when the dough gets cooked, it actually comes out crispy. But as to that, I'm
unfamiliar with Alefantis. So what is the connection? I don't know who he is. So what is the connection?
James Alefantis. I don't know what his actual connection is. I imagine that his whole connection with NXIVM is for the Bronfmans. I imagine because they seem like they're all the same age. I'm sure they probably grew up together. They were probably just some disgustingly rich kids coming up together, and that was probably their whole connection with the thing. James Alefantis, this guy, he was he dated oh man, see now I'm forgetting the name of the guy he dated, but there was a whole thing that came out when the Hillary Clinton emails were being sifted through.
Okay.
And
was this the pizza shop owner of whatever the name of that pizza shop was? Oh,
yeah,
okay.
Comet Pizza.
Comet Pizza. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I'm drawing some connections here. Okay.
That's what they call pizza.
And there's a whole section which is a lot of people consider it highly conspiratorial, which is Pizzagate, and I guess it's a branch of the whole pedogate that they had, and the idea that there's
the whole Alex Jones thing of whatever that might be.
Yeah,
so I get it. But again, a name that's like, okay, all right, so one more name over here. So you got Schneiderman, which is kind of curious because his name plays into this stuff a little bit later on with either taking cases or not, or doing stuff or not. And then this other guy, which is thrown into the whole sex thing. So you say, oh, geez, okay. And then other people started walking in as well?
Yeah, well, there was some people there because I was on the deck smoking, so some people had arrived. And I came back in. There was just, kind of new faces in the room. And one of them, she was in the kitchen. She was mixing drinks up. The best way I can describe her, she just looked like a mean librarian. She had just some kind of thick glasses. Her hair was, I think it was tied up, probably just tied up in a ponytail and back. And she was wearing a white T-shirt, which probably about on the sleeves, probably about 2 or 3 rolls on the sleeves, and then she had it tied off on the side. But she was wearing a white T-shirt as well. And then I had spoke to her for just a brief second. I don't even know what we spoke about. It was just probably a quick introduction. And then I noticed across the room there was some girls on a couch, and one of them had glasses on. They both just kind of, I introduced myself quickly to them, and that was Claire and Sarah, and those were the Bromptons.
Wow.
And
so we got to give our listening audience a little bit of frame of reference, because again, these are names that a lot of people in the general population may not be familiar with these people's names. So these are the heiresses, I guess, the daughters of a gentleman who owned Seagram's, like the big thing. And as the dad, he gave them a lot of, somehow or another, they got a lot of money. And that's part of the way that allegedly Keith Raniere was able to finance this whole thing, by them helping to support him and also helping to fund him. So that's some of the allegations that goes across, and that kind of plays back into what Scott had mentioned as far as, where would he get $10 million for bail money? So lots of question marks. But there's some people with power and influence is what you're saying in this room as well.
Yeah, which makes it even weirder, because here we are in this 2-bedroom Hamden apartment, and there's all these people in there, and it struck me as kind of odd, but then again, we're there for this women's empowerment movement. So, you got to figure when it comes to some sort of movement, it's got to have some sort of backers. And so, you're just going to have some different people there that, whatever, not necessarily party people, but they have some sort of agenda. So.
Right, but it's also somewhat of an informal event because you're doing it in somebody's apartment as opposed to a hotel room or a boardroom or anything else like that. So people are having, fun. They're drinking. They're probably, if there's girls there, they're probably having some fun amongst themselves as well, And then the weird thing, the movies, that's kind of odd. The guy with the clipboard, that's kind of odd. Some older dude, if you will, some politician walking in, that's getting kind of strange. So I'd be kind of like, what's going on here? You got somebody who's an adult film person here as well. Where's all these connections fitting? If I was just a regular person looking in, like that gal at the library or maybe your ex-girlfriend, I'd be wondering what that. This is kind of weird, kind of creepy. I certainly would be checking the drinks to make sure there's nothing in it. You know what I mean? It's just kind of weird. So was there anything else that kind of struck you as you're remembering a little bit off as well?
The mean librarian I had been talking to, I identified her as Nancy Salzman. She kind of had a little bit of an...
So who is she in real life?
Nancy Salzman, when I looked into, because when I started looking at pictures of all these different players from the whole NXIVM stories that I had been seeing in the papers, Nancy Salzman is the one who, once Keith Raniere was arrested, she was the one who had basically taken over for the group. As far as I know, I might be wrong about this, but this is what.
Yeah, if I can break in real quick, when Keith Raniere was prosecuted by, I think, actually several states that investigated him, but the state of New York is the one that really laid down the law, and part of their decision or edict, whatever you want to call it, was that they said, Keith, you can never be involved in another MLM for the rest of your life. You can't own it, whatever. And so when he set up NXIVM, he was sort of like a silent partner. And Nancy Salzman was into this neuro-linguistic programming. We talked to Frank a couple weeks ago about mirroring, where you just sort of copy the movements of the other person to, get more comfortable with them and they with you. And that's part of it. I think it goes beyond that. But she is a nurse that knows about neuro-linguistic programming, and her and Keith Raniere got together, but she was really the figurehead. I mean, he was always in charge, but since he was prohibited from, owning and operating an MLM for the rest of his life after Consumer's Byline, she was really in charge, if you will, of the organization. And so, yeah, she is the top dog. She would be the one of two people that I think the next indictments are going to come down. It's going to be Nancy Salzman and it's going to be Claire Bronfman, in my opinion. Those are the two next shoes to drop as they gather enough evidence to, go back to court and say, hey, we need to indict these people too. And that's kind of how Nancy fits in. She really is the person in charge. Now, since Claire and Sarah are the money bags, I'm sure they had quite a bit of influence as well. But I think she's the real official brains behind the operation, even though Raniere is sort of the puppet master, if you will, if that helps a little bit, Peter.
Got it. Okay, good.
Interesting. It's interesting as well, because at the party, I describe her as an angry librarian or a mean librarian, but she really did seem like she was the den mother of the group. I don't know if that makes any sense, but she was kind of making drinks, and she was making sure everyone was, all the different, at least between Alephantis and the Bronfmans, I mean, she was mixing them drinks and making sure that they had everything they needed. But she did strike me as kind of like a den mother.
Ben, who else walked in? There's at least one more name that I recall you talking about before.
Well, so that's the thing, because I'm seeing that Nancy Salzman, she has kind of a little bit of an entourage. She has some pretty ladies with her, and I'm not sure about this, so don't quote me on it, but I think they might have been local bartenders, and maybe they went around and maybe paid some people to come hang out at the party or something, or maybe just approached them in general and got them to come along to see this thing. They weren't initially there with the female-only part of the group, so I imagine maybe they could have been just members of NXIVM in general that were just coming to show their appreciation and just represent in general. And one of the females was this kind of mystical woman. She just had this look of kind of mystique to her. Tiny frame, very, very exotic, and I would say, she was either Middle Eastern or she was from Indian or Saudi Arabian or something like that, and she had a very peculiar air about her. And I didn't really speak to her until there's one more character that entered the room, and he was just this sweaty, skinny guy. He struck me. I thought, he had a very deep New York accent, and like I said, he was just kind of a sweaty, fast-talking, nervous guy. And he introduced himself as Anthony Weiner. And when I was speaking to him, he actually mentioned, because he turned and said, "Oh, that's my wife Uma," and he pointed out this mystical woman that was kind of tucked away in the side of the room, just kind of. She wasn't saying or talking to anyone really. She was just there, and he introduced her as his wife, and I talked with Anthony for a second. He had mentioned that he was coming in late. I think that Uma was a little bit mad at him for it because he had got stuck in some traffic coming up 95. So he came up 95 probably through coming up from New York. That's one of the only ways. That's the best way to get to New Haven from say if you're in Manhattan or say if you're in New York at all. Is to go up 95, and I did think it was kind of weird to say that he was stuck in traffic because it was around probably the traffic that hits. It's usually gone after about 7 p.m. and it was probably around 9 or 10 p.m. when he was there. I think it was more around 10 p.m.
She should have dumped him that night. She should have dumped him that night. She would have saved herself a lot of trouble.
Maybe. I don't know. Maybe because there's not a lot of stuff that even looking into her, there's not a lot of stuff that you could find out. Maybe they're perfect for each other. Who knows?
I don't know.
Well, they're divorced now. I think that's gone through.
That didn't. Yeah, that whole thing didn't work out well.
No, it didn't.
So
well, at least
we only
as far
have
as the papers want to tell us.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's true. That is so true too. But as we go, and we only have a few more minutes left. So, what are some of the reasons why you want to bring this out in the public? Now so let me give you our agenda. One of the reasons why we want this story kind of told is because the whole NXIVM thing is just a really exaggerated example of the quote-unquote alleged cult-like type of thing that sometimes happens with that behavior. The celebrity rock star, the meetings, the whole culture, the whole self-development thing, and then eventually people get in, the more vulnerable ones, and maybe even the ones that have the money, get sucked in. Now, it may have nothing to do with sex, but it has something to do with feelings and emotions and money, and all of a sudden, many times, I call it the triple G's, the goofy, the gullible, and the greedy. If somebody's got some money, all of a sudden now it's gone. And they were kind of seduced by this whole environment of this cult-like thing. That's why I wanted part of this story told, because, there's a little bit of an MLM spin to it, but really the whole self-development cult-like type of thing is very prevalent, if you will, in the MLM world, and I think our listening audience needs to at least be aware of it, whether they can enjoy it. Now, by the way, just so you know, if you go to Frank Report, he proposes that part of the defense that Raniere may have may be that all of this stuff was consensual. And if you go to one of the articles that he has about this as a defense, you'll see he's got a line of photos with very smart, intelligent, good-looking, by my definition, people that if they get up there and say, listen, this is just what I wanted, this is totally consensual, blah, 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 blah. But you would be fooled if you were to think that these people were taken advantage of. Now, he may have the goods on them and all that other stuff as well. But I just wanted to kind of highlight it as you got to watch out because these things do happen. So, Scott, that's why I wanted this portion of the story told. You can tell our Building Fortunes Radio listening audience why you wanted this story told, and then I want Ben to have his chance to tell people why he wanted this story told. So back to you,
Peter,
Scott.
I'm pretty much aligned with what you were looking for. I was trying to use Ben's story and NXIVM in general as an illustration of some of the aspects on how MLMs work, even though this one is much more drastic and dramatic. It illustrates certain principles, and they're easier to see in an MLM when you've seen the exaggeration, and then you dial it back a couple notches, and if you're seeing a similar thing in your MLM, that should put little warning bells in your mind. Things like inviting people into something and then it becomes much more than they realized. And when I say much more, I mean much more evil. In the case of Amway, operating as an illegal pyramid, you can't walk up to somebody in the street and go, hey, do you want to join Amway? It's an illegal pyramid. You wouldn't get too many takers. Or, hey, do you want to join Amway? We're going to scam you on all the tools. we make a lot more money from the tools than we do from Amway. But don't tell anybody, because that wouldn't fly very well. So those are the kinds of things, when you're looking at an MLM, be careful. Be aware of these things and ask questions and know what to look for. And this is a good illustration of that, taken to the extreme, of course, but I think it really does help the learning process, if you will, as far as what to be on guard for and what to be aware of. So I'll give it back to you, Ben, for you to give your take on, why you came out now. And I think we heard some of that as far as that, but what are you trying to accomplish with coming out? What's the purpose of you telling the story?
Well, first of all, I realized that the experience that I have, it sounds absolutely fantastic, and in a lot of ways, it just sounds like I'm jumping the shark. In which a lot of people have accused me of basically just engineering some sort of fan fiction and pushing that forward. Therein lies the dilemma. I mean, it sounds what I'm saying sounds, like I said, pretty fantastic, and so, I'm telling people of this experience, and even to me, I'm just like, nobody's gonna believe this. Nobody's gonna believe that I was at this party and meeting these people, shaking hands with these people, and talking with them, and it just sounds absolutely ridiculous. But on the other hand of that, what do I do? Do I change it around to make it seem more believable? It would just be it wouldn't be true. So to come forward and talk about this experience, it's I think it's important in the respects that I had this opportunity to see an alleged sex cult that's into human trafficking and apparently child trafficking, if you read the court docket. And they were working in unison with soon-to-be high-powered politicians, people who eventually went on to have a lot of power and influence in politics. And all of these people together, I mean, you look at all these headlines that are coming out, and all these people are just a part of them. They're all a part of this whole thing. And I think that going to this party, it was kind of a special thing because it was just a little bit of a behind the scenes peek at things that people don't get a chance to either hear about or see for themselves. And so I think it is important that I talk to people about this, and that I tell people exactly what happened. And like I said, I've done a couple of different AMAs. They're Ask Me Anything rounds. I did one on Reddit, and then I'll mention that there's a female. Her name is the Tanster, and she has absolutely come to bat for me and put my story out there towards a lot of people who I would have never thought of bringing this whole experience out to. So she's been a great help in that, and I did want to thank her. And overall,
yeah, I talked to her also, Ben, and what impresses her about you is all of these different venues you've been in. Your story has stayed consistent, and that has really impressed her. It impresses me too. If you can keep a story straight, it's much more likely that it's true. And I would ask people to do this if they think your story is way out there. Go to frankreport.com. Go to some of either the newer or the older stories, whichever, just do a mixture of stories on frankreport.com and read them and try to put yourself in the place that you have no idea that the FBI is investigating these people. You have no idea that Keith and Allison have been indicted. Keith can't get out of jail even with a $10 million armed guard offer. Allison is out on a $5 million bond. She has to wear the ankle bracelet, or GPS, even when she's on the airplane, going back and forth between California and New York where the court case is. Forget all of that stuff. Read those stories and ask yourself, is this reasonable? Or is this like really far out there and right on the edge of reality, if not beyond the edge? And I would say that your story is no further out than a lot of those stories on FrankReport.com. If you can just erase all of the knowledge of how much trouble these people are in right now and just pretend that it's brand new and you're just reading the story and there's no other circumstances that you're aware of, I would say that your story is perfectly reasonable in that context. So I'll give it back to you guys.
Yeah, well, I'd look at this as saying, you know, for all those people listening in, and if you go look at some of the pictures that I had referenced in that one thing where Frank Report was talking about maybe a potential defense that Raniere might have to say that all these people were consensual. Look at the pictures. They're the girl next door. They're the person who could be a doctor, the person who could be a lawyer. These are all the people that could be those innocent people that were in the library when they were invited to come to a meeting. And this is what one of these things looks like when they first get started. The one thing that I haven't asked you yet, Benjamin, is whatever. I'm not worried about the girlfriend, like the ex-girlfriend thing, because we all know that sometimes things happen. But what was her take when she was finished with that whole meeting? Like, what was her reaction towards when this, quote-unquote party was done?
At the time, we just thought that it was weird. The former girlfriend's friend, the one who was initially invited to this whole thing, she seemed pretty let down because she thought that this might be a cool experience, and when it really boiled down to it, it just seemed like these people were some weird sorority cult or something like that. And that's just kind of the frame of mind that we had getting out of there, because when we left there, we were kind of gearing up to leave, and kind of going around and saying some quick goodbyes to people, and I remember going by and saying hey, nice to meet you to Anthony Weiner, and he stopped me. He's like, whoa, wait a minute. He yells out to Uma, and he's like, Uma, do we have the names of all these people down who are in attendance? And so Uma went around with a sheet of paper, and starting with me, she started taking down the names of the people who were at this party. So I did contact the New York Department of Justice, and if they actually did capture all of the NXIVM's files, there should be perhaps a file. I don't know if this is a little too hopeful, but there should be a 2007 file from February, and I should be on an attendance sheet for that party that was on Skip Street.
Wow. So you're referencing that you think that they weren't, they just didn't show up. They might have actually been somehow involved. However that might be, you don't know, but they might be involved, and whatever happened in 2007 might have even festered, if you will. Beyond that, who knows? So who knows? Right. Very interesting. Very interesting. Well, again, my spin on this whole thing was that, this is what it looks like when they get started. And there's an insidious nature, so they look for the goofy, the greedy, or the gullible. And in essence, relative to this, I'm sure most of those people, even if they now say it's consensual or was consensual, they probably didn't start off that way. It probably was a gradual, if you will, brainwashing, a gradual, if you will, indoctrination. It was probably a gradual transition, and then eventually it became their normal, as weird or twisted as that might sound. And that's just really a shame, because there's a lot of people's lives who are totally messed up as a result of this. So you guys just escaped, I'm going to use the word escaped, it's just a weird party. And then, if you're in college, you've been to a couple of those. So that was it, and then all of a sudden now this stuff is starting to happen, and you're getting the flashbacks as you see the end result as NXIVM is going on trial, quote unquote. So I really appreciate you being here, Benjamin. Hopefully if there's any new news or anything else like that, some more things that we can tie together, we'll bring you back. Scott, I'll let you wrap it up.
Yeah, on top of what you talked about with talking to the New York Department of Justice, Benjamin, the other thing that has impressed me is you're willing to take a lie detector test. And I put out a challenge to the people on Frank Report that were giving you a hard time the last few days. And I think you've offered to pay for half of it. Is that true?
Absolutely, absolutely.
So I challenge them to put up a few bucks each for the other half, and then they can actually do something constructive rather than just, personal put downs and so forth. If they want to take you up on that, then they can put some of their money where their mouth is, rather than just verbally talking about you like that. So I think those two things are in your favor as far as this story being legitimate, and we'll see where that goes. But I certainly appreciate you being on here, and we'll keep following this story as well as the broader NXIVM story. And certainly if anything happens with you as far as a development, please let us know, and we'll be glad to bring you back on and go over those developments. So I guess that's it for me, Peter. Ben, if you wanted to say anything at the end here, maybe we didn't get a chance to ask you, or it just popped in your brain in the last second, I'll let you say a couple words, and then Peter can sign us off.
Okay, it sounds like you guys are wrapping up, and I'll just say that, I appreciate what you guys are doing. You guys are trying to shine a spotlight on something that people don't necessarily see in their everyday lives, or if they do, they may not even recognize it. I mean, when it comes to cults and stuff like that, in the United States, cults are not illegal. They're absolutely not. There's no laws against that. And I think that people need to have a better understanding of how these groups operate and how they manipulate people. And you guys are fighting the good fight, and I appreciate you for that. And I also I thank you so much for having me on this. It's like I said, it's been so hard to meet anything but resistance when it comes to this experience that I'm trying to bring out to people. And I feel that there's a few and far between support, and it's really encouraging to come across folks like you guys. But I want to thank you for that.
Well, you're welcome, Benjamin. I appreciate this, first of all, because number one, we're sitting here at the end of spring, going into summer. There's going to be a lot of college students that go away to college. A lot of these things happen when you're away at college. You're away from maybe parental guidance or parental nagging, and you're in a vulnerable situation. There's a lot of peer pressure. You're exposed to new things. You're going to experiment. There could be a whole bunch of things. So these are prime areas for people to be manipulated or steered in the right direction. So for those college students or parents with college students, I hate to say it, but this is where it starts. So they're somewhat vulnerable. So I really appreciate, even though we're just talking about a party that lasted just a few hours, and you're recounting your experiences that you heard, I appreciate you being here only because it just puts a spotlight on how Raniere operated and how it developed over time, and the number of people's lives that he influenced and probably even destroyed or negatively influenced as well. And he's facing an ultimate price right now, but there's a ton of people, a lot of damage control here. So thanks, everybody, for being here. Benjamin, thanks for being here. Let me, for those people that might be wondering, how do you spell his last name? It's S as in Sam, Z like zebra, E, M as in Mary, K as in kangaroo, U-S, and it's pronounced Szemkus, but it's S-Z-E-M-K-U-S, and you'll see his name on the frankreport.com, as well as if you find the YouTube video. I think it was on YouTube that I saw as well. But we really appreciate you spending part of your time here on a Saturday night with us on Building Fortunes Radio. We're going to catch everybody next week. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Scott. So long. Bye for now.
Thank you, Peter.
Happy Father's Day. Thank you.
You've been listening to Building Fortunes Radio on buildingfortunesradio.com. Thanks for listening. Be sure to check us out every Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time for the designated Building Fortunes Radio segment with Peter Mingles. Be sure to check out the BuildingFortunesRadio.com website for our featured segments. It's been our privilege to have you listen in. At Building Fortunes Radio, we wish you the success you deserve and are willing to work for. So spread the word, tell a friend, join our newsletter, and go make a difference in your world.